get tonight. It's going to be a really interesting mixture of people, I think, tonight, because I think there's going to be quite a few therapists mixed with quite a few of us kinky weirdos, the rest of us type thing, you know, us queer, poly, weirdo, lovely people. And I think a lot of the therapists that were coming are going to identify as that as well. So it's going to be a real mixture of people. So, if somebody's got their mic on, please can they make sure that they mute it, please? I'll mute all, but I don't want to keep doing it all the way through. So, Jacob's saying hello, Sahuvian saying hello, Jerry's saying hello, Liz McLaughlin saying first time here, very excited for this. Thank you. I really hope you like it. If you don't, tell me I'm a heap of shit. That's okay too. I won't take it to heart. Grey Ace, been a while. Nice to see you. Really nice to see you. Jacob says hi. Hello. Carrie says hi. Nemoria sends his love. He has COVID. Oh, yuck. I hope he's all right. Send him my love too. Kinky weirdos who experience a therapist. Yeah, that'll do as well, won't it? Nikki says hello. Zoe says hello. Miniface and Clara say hi. Oh, Jerry says, why do you expect more shrinks? Because I've advertised shrinks. Fuck off. Because I've advertised this on the Pink Therapy group, because this is very much about how we practice and what we do. So it's good CPD for therapists, and it's good for us as well, because we can have those interactions and those chats. Shay says, hello, hello. Cosmic Stream is live and well, thank you. I'm well, I hope you are too. Ginny says hello. Alice says hello. Cinder says, oh no, sorry to hear that Nemoria's COVID. Yeah, send him all of our love. Michael says hello. Reverend Chuli says hello. Jacob, how should I contact you for CPD certificates for this session? My email, deborah.fields@gmail.com, and I'll put it on at the end, so it's not a problem. Fern says hello, or on Facebook, or on FetLife. Either are fine. But if not, Loda says hello. Poppy says hello. Angel says hello. Everyone's saying hello. Lots and lots and lots of hellos. Sorry, I will not read them all out, otherwise I'm just going to get lost, because there are 24 messages. So I apologise if I don't read everyone out. I'll really try hard to do that. Every bugger is getting COVID these days. I would agree with you. That's happening. Everyone's going to send his love. Dania, hello from Italy. I hope you understand all the speech. I speak so fast and fastly, quickly. You might be better off re-listening to this at half speed and it will sound normal. So I'm really sorry, because I am fast. I would try and think about that and slow down a little bit, because absolutely inclusive. So I would do my best, but I get very excited and get carried away, I'm afraid. So I will try. I hear you. Zoe, wishing Nemoria well. That's really nice. Oh, look at us. We all love each other. Andy, hello. Lola, I missed your voice, Deb. Really? That's quite impressive, but thank you. I missed your presence. Thank you too. Tass says hi. Jerry says fastly. I know. I mean, I can't speak English. Had Rona, it's horrid. It is. I'm loving Sahuvian's name, fellow. Don't forget the swear words. Moi? Never. Never swear me. And Cinder says, Jerry, that seems to be the case at the moment. One of my neighbours works in a care home and her staff are all off with it. I've got flu, not COVID. Or Ginny, I wish you better. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Okay, so what are we looking at today? First of all, let's look at the rules for this room. This room is mainly full of people who are LGBTQI, kinky, poly, alternative human beings. The way we like to do it in this room is that nobody comments on what anybody looks like. Nobody says anything unless it's about Cuthbert Bear. That's allowed because Cuthbert's not human, but don't tell anyone else that. Right, so and we're a group of people, some of us who know each other now, and we're a group of people who've met through me doing this for the last, is it 2 years nearly now? Every week. So through lockdown, we did this every Sunday and every Thursday. And then since then, we're still doing it every Thursday, most Thursdays. The rules are, please keep your mic on silent. If you want to say anything, please write it down the side. If you want a CPD certificate, I will put up my name, my email towards the end. So you've got that. That's not a problem. I'll probably be a bit late doing them. I'll try and be fast because I'm going to America on Tuesday for 2 weeks cheerleading. We're going to Summit. So the next 2 Thursdays will not be on because I will look, I won't be here. Please be dressed if you're here, wear some clothes, and please put down how you want to be identified. No wanking, seriously, have had 2 people doing that. You will be blocked, you will be chucked out. That's the rules. Even if you're uncomfortable with that, I'm more uncomfortable with your bits being on show, trust me, so I'm really not interested. And we do like a wanker wave at the end to say goodbye, as Princess Alice just said. So the content of today is really about being a therapist and being a kinky, queer, poly, alternative type therapist and what that means. I personally think I'm in a very privileged, hi Simon, I personally think I'm in a very privileged position. I am out fully, my family know, my friends know, I'm known professionally for being kinky and queer, so that helps me in so many ways. So I've been that for a lot of the time. So I think this is so important about how we relate this to that privilege as well. So I'm lucky from that perspective, because we can turn and say that actually it's not dangerous for us at work, even as therapists. It is dangerous for us. It's dangerous for anyone in any form of work still. There are no specific laws really protecting us, no matter where we live in the world, because every job or most jobs have some kind of moral clause that states what we need to do and what that's going to look like. Absolutely possible to lose your license in the United States for being kinky. I wasn't out when I lived there. Exactly. And in the UK, we don't have to be licensed. There's a difference. In fact, the psychotherapist, therapist, counselor are not protected terms. So even though lots of us do lots of exams and lots of CPD and lots of work to make sure that we are qualified, you don't have to be qualified at all to do what I'm doing now. And it's really interesting that lots of people get asked about their qualifications. Some people do and some people don't. We're all different. So again, I feel very lucky. I started this title off as the Kink Shrink, I think it's about 9 years ago. I changed my name and I started writing a lot more about this sort of stuff. And I was out anyway, but I really outed myself by doing everything that I do now. And I have over 600 and something writings on FetLife that are very much about psychology and kink and polyamory, communication, mental health, and all of those things. I don't tend to write a lot in the therapy world. So it's important. Wow, I've missed 2 weeks and you skipped last week. A surprise to go back to daylight, even though I'm in the same time zone. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So is it 7 years? Is it 7 years? Yeah. So we've known each other for 7 years. So it might be about 7. As I say, I'm really not sure of my own timeline, so I apologize. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about kink, poly, and a lot of people will refer to this as gender, sexually, relationship diverse. So there are lots of different titles out there. By that, I kind of mean me. That's the definition. So when you want to go for therapy, you're going to start looking in places and try and find a therapist. And as a therapist, this will also impact you as well. So people want to come and talk to people, maybe about BDSM, maybe about being poly, maybe about being queer, and the impact that that has. And what we know statistically is people in our circles actually have often a poorer mental health. The reason I say that is because we've had a lot of shit. We have a lot of shit at school. We have a lot of shit in life. There's a lot of shit. So our mental health suffers a little more. And that's the same for anyone, even who is a therapist or anyone else as well, because we've had those feelings and those thoughts put towards us about how people feel about those things. And I find personally that I would argue that over 85% of my client base falls under this genre of human beings, us, so queer, kinky, poly. So I have a lot of people who fall into this, and I do have some people who are vanilla and heterosexual. I know, what is that? Or whatever they are, monogamous, those people over there. So I do have a percentage of those clients as well. And what I find is a lot of people assume that when a client comes to me, when they're into BDSM or they're poly, or it's about them being queer, that they're coming for that. That's so far from the truth. It's unbelievable. Most clients want to come and say, I'm queer and I've got depression. I'm into poly, but I've got anxiety. So like most of us aren't coming to therapy because this being the problem. And that's really difficult. So we have to accept that actually a lot of people might be coming because of their sexuality, their relationship preferences, their gender identity. They might be coming for a lot of those things. However, a lot of it is unrelated as well. Because when you really start talking to somebody, they'll have anxiety, they'll have depression, they'll have stress, they'll have burnout, they'll have a lot of identity issues. And those identity issues can certainly be more conflicting when we're brought up in a very cis heteronormative environment and we're breaking out to be something that some people around us might not accept. So the problem being a therapist is there are 3 forms of okayness that we can say with around kink, poly, queer. We can say that we are maybe kink aware, We can say that we are kink friendly or poly friendly, or we can say that we are active. However, as a therapist, do you want to come out? If you are active, so Andy says, I sometimes wonder how people in your profession switch off from all the different people you see on a daily basis. I imagine it can have an impact. I think when you're learning, one of the really important things to do is to learn like a DBT format when we talk about having a Teflon mind. If something sticks, that's the stuff we end up taking to supervision. That's why we need supervision. And if something sticks and is really personal, we need to make sure our personal therapy is up there as well. That's part of our responsibility. And of course, some things do get to us. And I watch people do things very differently. And somebody just wrote me a private message saying, I'm seeing somebody here, and it's just a backdrop of kink poly is good to have understood. Exactly. Know what your stuff and what is projective, what is projection. Yeah. So I think personally, one of the things I always ask a therapist when I'm going to see a therapist isn't what qualifications they've got. One of the first questions I ask is, how much personal therapy have you had? I want to know that you've done the journey. I want to know that you've done preferably more or similar hours to me. My hours are around 500, 600, something like that. I've had a lot of personal therapy. So that's the stuff I really want to know. I'm not that interested in your approach. I'm interested in how we get on and what that means. And I'm not interested in whether you are non-judgmental, because for me, that's a heap of shit. You've judged me as soon as you've come in. You've judged my background. You don't know me. You've judged me. Same as I've judged all of you. Judgment is always present in a therapy room. It's what you do with it that counts, and it's how you use it as information and everything else as well. And when we know a lot about somebody's diversity background, could be a disability, could be a mental health issue, could be the fact that they're poly, kinky, could be that they're in a throuple, could be that, you know, they're queer. We turn around and say, hey, well, even Carl Rogers, non-judgmental. Absolutely. I love a lot of Rogers. I love the 7 stages of therapy that Rogers looks at and the therapeutic process that we're in. I don't know if I believe. Honestly, anyone who's a therapist here, can you honestly say you're 100% non-judgmental? Can you? And as human beings, are we non-judgmental? I think we judge. And again, I'm just going to have to turn everyone's speakers off. Sorry. I keep asking. So yes, there is something about, we can ideally look for, we have 0 judgment, but actually it's really liberating and invigorating to look at what that judgment means. If I see judgment as information. It's telling me something about me and about, and that's what I want to work with. That's what I'm more interested in. So I think that's a lot more exciting to have a look at rather than whatever. So Nikki says, I think we hope to be, but it's natural to judge and part of life. Absolutely. Kara says, can't be non-judgmental. Judging is a survival mechanism. And Liz says, as humans, we are always judgmental. It's a natural state of perceiving our world. It is what you do with it that counts. Spot on. Thank you. And Tova says, hi. Hi, Tova. So again, I'm still having to turn people off. Please, please keep your microphone off. Please, please keep your microphone off. Because I'm doing this all by myself and there are 70 people. Oh, and again, I'm really trying. I don't know who that is. Right. Okay. If your microphone keeps coming on, I have to chuck you out if you're going to be really noisy, I'm afraid. So I might put that on. I can't see who that is. That's a nightmare. That was Matthew. Matthew, please turn your microphone off. And Colton Myers, it's C. Please turn your microphones off. Thank you. I will keep trying to do this all the time. Right, so what we're looking at as well is how kink aware somebody is a therapist and what they're doing and what that looks like. Thank you for checking that if you checked your microphones are off. So when you study as a therapist, I've done lots.
Is my microphone off?
Well, it's on now.
Oh.
So if you could turn it off, that would be lovely. I'm going to mute you all again. Thank you. Shut the fuck up. Please don't be rude. Like, respect in this room is really important to me. That is not okay. So if I hear that language again, I'm going to ask you to go. Don't normally have this much trouble with microphones. So when somebody trains as a therapist, they don't necessarily get any training at all when it comes to us. And that's
That's dump C out.
I am. Remove. Submit. Done. Removed. Honestly, never get this trouble. Never get this trouble. Crazy. So when people go for some kind of,
Debs,
Hello.
Debs, dump out Matthew as well, please.
where is Matthew? Okay, wow, this
Bro,
is,
that wasn't me, bro. That was some other.
never had this before, have we? This is quite interesting. Got some troublemakers in. Thank you. Kicked them both out. Gosh, never had this much trouble before. I will handle it with my normal finesse of what a bunch of twats. That's what I'll say. Right, so what's important here is to realize that when somebody is a counselor or a therapist or a psychotherapist or maybe some kind of psychologist, it does not mean that they have had any training at all in trauma and or in any form of sexuality, gender diversity, relationship diversity. That is an extra course that people have to do. So we have to be aware of that as well. So counseling training doesn't cover that. Therapy training doesn't cover that. You can do something like a psychosexual psychotherapy course for 2 years afterwards. I did that. And I can honestly tell you that we spent a weekend on kink and on everything else as well. That was it, a weekend. So out of all of those 2 years, it was just a weekend, and that covered polyamory, sexual diversity and relationships and kink, which I don't think is enough for anyone. So I leaked it, no cap, I don't understand what's going on here. So you can also do other optional courses later from places like Kink Therapy in the UK and other diplomas and other forms of trauma training afterwards. So if that's important to you, please make sure you ask any therapist. And if you are a therapist, please look up courses so you can make sure that you get it. So the Pink Therapy courses are great. There are lots of really good courses for you to have a look and to see where you go. Right, so is it bad to be out as a therapist? What's it like and how do we get to know all of these things? So Eunice says, I so appreciated that my course specifically discussed GSRD experiences multiple times, but it's still from the point of view of it being different. Yes, I agree. And that's the point, isn't it? It's all about us being different rather than okay. One of the things we need to look at as a kink therapist, as a sexual therapist, as somebody who is queer or has sexual desires that aren't considered normal, whatever the fuck that word means is beyond me, right? So in society as it is. So FNF, you need to mute your mic. So where's FNF? Can't find these people. This is getting really hard. I've never had this before. No, that is me. Oh no, it's somebody playing me back. Clever.
Debs, can you make Poppy or me an admin so we can do this for you?
Oh, that's a good idea. What?
Hello, Podina.
Who's that? I don't know how to make you an admin.
That's someone called Tawisha.
Jesus Christ, has anyone had this before? We've never had this before. So I'm really sorry to anyone who's
And
new.
James Cogalton.
James, where's James? Wow, this is shocking. Never had this before. I'll remove them as we go. It's quite shocking. I apologize. So it's really important that we need to understand who we are and what that means. If we come out as kinky, if we come out as queer, if we come out as poly, that can impact our relationships with our clients and with everybody else as well. And it does have an impact. So it's really important to understand that it does have an impact. So we have to be very careful. Discrimination laws don't particularly help us. They don't, is it? So where have all these people come from? It's just amazing. It's really important that we understand that there is discrimination law around, but it doesn't really help a lot of us. It really doesn't. So we've got to be really careful about how we come out and what we do. So what do you say, Robert? God, never had this before.
Why is it so big?
Move to another one. Click the security icon at the bottom of your Zoom window and then click the button that says lock meeting. This will stop these fools from coming back. I don't think they can come back either. They keep changing their name. Okay, I can't deal with it at the same time as being able to speak. So who's Thor? Wow, this is quite amazing. Okay, going to carry on anyway. So if you are not safe, particularly in coming out to your job, you've got to be very aware of that and the privilege that can create. We've had situations where people have had serious issues when it comes to coming out and being out. Some friends that I've had over the years have lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods because of kink. And that's especially around and poly and different things. And that's especially there for teachers. That's especially there for different people. So we've got to be very careful about protecting ourselves. So the code got leaked on Twitter. Who would want to come into this as a teenager? I don't want a teenager here. Okay, let me try and find Thor. Where is Thor? Can't find him. Fantastic. They're coming back to lock meeting. I don't know how to lock the meeting. Anyone help me how I can lock the meeting? Meeting, how do I lock it? Lock the meeting. When you lock a meeting, nobody else can. Yes, but I don't know how. Press the security button. Where's the security button? Security. Locked. Brilliant. Thank you very much for telling me. Done that. So anyone else who starts now, I can chuck them out. So I apologize. Fucking hell. Interesting. Right. Okay. Let's carry on. Boot call in user one. Where's user one? It's all right. It doesn't matter. I'll get there. It's not going to stop me or my flow. Trust me. We all know what I'm like. I'll be all right.
Oh, you and your flow.
I know. To make someone else admin, hover over their name and click more, make a host. Right, okay. So click more, make host. Jerry, you're a host. Oh, I can only make one person a host. Jerry, your host. It's like whack-a-mole. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? As I say, never had this before. Okay, so.
No pressure then on me.
Why does all of this sort of stuff happen? What happens to us and what does this mean? As a kink-aware therapist, we have to be really aware of boundaries. There are governing bodies that turn around and say that this is the way that we should act. And I'm going to go through a few of those with you and let you know what that's like and let you know what rules are around. The problem is for kink, poly, queer therapists, there are no specific rules for us. There are no rules that turn around and say, this is the way you've got to act and this is the way that you've got to do it. So we've got to be very careful. What have we got to be very careful of? Well, let's have a look at a few of the rules and how that works. I'm going to take the UKCP. So the UKCP is a professional body. By the way, in the UK, you do not have to be a member of any professional body legally, morally, ethically, if you don't want to be. They are not bodies that are connected to the government, technically. So they are things that we choose to join or not. So that's something to be aware of as well. And some therapists become accredited, and that's by working and covering things with their peers, so they get their accreditation. And a lot of therapists don't want to be accredited either. So there's a real variety. You need to talk to your therapist about what that looks like and what that's going to be. And as a therapist, you need to think about how do you want to do this and what does it mean? So if you have a client means have clients from your own social circle. I'll come into that in a minute. So it means an individual, a couple, a family, and for us, it might also mean a polycule, which is a group of people in a poly relationship. It might be a throuple. It might be a very few fair things. So we have to look at ethical conduct. When I started many years ago, you used to have an ethical list. It was like 300 long, and you had to remember all these rules and look them up. And have a look at what they're doing and how that worked. It was crazy. It was a really different time. That was then changed. So it is Jack, somebody I need to get rid of. Jerry, could you for me? That would be lovely. Thank you. So what we have to look at is, as an ethical practice, what do we have to look at? I know there were just hundreds. Was that set by a particular body like WPATH for transgender treatment? No. So it was set before our ethical standards changed, whatever body you were with. So like if you started transactional analysis and you were under UCARTA or somebody, or if you were, depending on where you were and what you did, each of them had their own ethical guidelines, which was this great big folder of how you work and what that looks like. It was crazy. And you had to really try and remember what those rules were. Nowadays, we just talk about ethical practice. Eunice, I'm not necessarily sure I trust most of the bigger membership bodies to really know how to consider the nuances of being queer, poly, kinky, a therapist. Anyway, I sometimes feel like they follow the crowd, not leading ethical standards. And I would agree with you. I would wholeheartedly agree with you that they don't listen to the people that are actually working and living this as well. And in fact, we can have bias put against us. We have to act in the best interest of our clients. We have to act professionally. We've got to look at communication and consent. And we have to look at our records and confidentiality as to how we work. This is from the UKCP. We have to have professional knowledge and skills and experience, a social responsibility, and a trust and a confidence. That's quite difficult, isn't it? So how do we, I think one of the main fundamental rules is about not abusing your relationship with a client, current or past, including for emotional, sexual, or financial gain. Thank you very much, Jerry, for doing that. So that's important too. We have to make sure that we're aware of a power imbalance which exists between us as a practitioner and the client. Lots of you are both, and lots of you are one or the other. We've got to be aware that multiple or dual relationships could impact that in some way, shape, or form. Again, I want to cover that in a minute because that's quite important. Because in small communities, even the UKCP say that it is almost unavoidable. Now, in a queer community, in a gay community, in a poly community, in all of those other places, this stuff is near enough unavoidable some of the time. You know someone who slept with someone, who's had this person, who's done this, and who's done that. So we just have to be very aware of what that means and what that looks like. So we, as therapists, have to take that responsibility for clarifying and managing those boundaries and protecting the people that we're working with by also talking about it, by being open and honest. I've had situations where I've been dealing with a client for maybe 5 months, 6 months. They tell me about a partner they've been seeing for the last 3 or 4 months. It could be somebody that I have seen, an ex-client. It could be somebody, I've had it, but it's somebody that I have slept with. And I'm like, oh man. And there are a lot of these ethical considerations that come into it. Kim Etherington, in one of her books, speaks to the power of dynamic between a therapist and a client, accepting that it exists, but it's what we do with it that counts, and not to abuse the difference. I agree with that, Beam. I do not think that equality comes into this at all. We talk about having an equal relationship with a therapist and as a therapist. It does not exist. When somebody comes in to see you, Nikita, you've written a message to somebody. Can we not do that? Can we just address it to me, please? So we're not commenting on what anybody looks like, what they're doing, or what they're saying. So that's what we've said before. So please don't do that. Otherwise I have to remove you, or Jerry will remove you. So it's really important that we have to be aware and take responsibility for these interesting relationships, because they could really impact us. It could be, did you tell your client that you'd slept with their partner? What was the client-therapist relationship like with that knowledge? I'll come back to that one because it's an example I'm going to give. So I'll come back to that one towards the end when I'm going to give you some examples of horrific to really easy to manage. That was a horrific one to manage. I'll come back to it. No, thank you, Nikita, for apologizing. Appreciate it. So we have to be really careful. We have to exercise reasonable care before we go into a relationship. But there's only so much we can do with a very small community. And it is a small community worldwide, even. It's a very small community that we're in. We also have to say, and this is rule number 10 from the UKCP, which is really important. It says, recognize that your behavior outside of your professional life may have an effect on your relationships with clients, and that we have to critically examine the potential negative or positive effects of that. So that's really difficult, isn't it? That's really difficult for us as human beings, because we don't know how that's going to work out, or the power imbalance. So for example, if somebody comes to me as the kink shrink and I've got 14,000, can we take Bob out, please, Jerry? Thank you. If we take out Bob, that would be lovely. If we have to have a look at what this looks like for us, then there's always going to be a potential impact of power there. So for me, with 14,000 followers on FetLife, people are going to think something about me, and there is a power difference already. Oh, can I come and see you because you're the kink shrink? I get that a lot. And actually, that's not enough to see me. We need to have lots more conversations about why have you picked me? What does that mean? And what does that look like? Because we have to be aware of the power imbalance that we're working with. And one of the things that really comes into that is dual relationships. Bob became Tom, but I booted them anyway. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So a dual relationship is when we have a significant or a second relationship with somebody else. And what could that look like? It could mean that they are our nurse, our neighbor, And it comes under a couple of sections that we can look at. There is a social dual relationship. And a social dual relationship means that that potentially is that there is a friend or there is somebody who is known. Now that can really happen in our communities because our communities are very small. So that's always a potential impact, social dual relationship. There is a difference between a friend and acquaintance, and there are arguments as to actually being an acquaintance can potentially help sometimes. That's covered by a lot of research and looked at, and there are those that are very against that as well. We can have a professional dual relationship. So it might be that we're working on a project together professionally. However, if I then become your therapist, that's not necessarily the best thing to do either. So we have to be very careful of those. There are business dual relationships. So like Poppy and I are going to run some workshops this year and next year. We're starting to do these whole weekends. And these weekend workshops will be, are we born this way if we're kinky and poly and alternative? So we're going to look at epigenetics. We're going to look at first aid. We're going to look at everything, you name it, the beginning to end of a relationship that includes poly and kink and everything else as well. And it'll make a difference. So that's really important that, you know, I recognize that I have a relationship with Poppy. She also happens to be a friend. There is no way I'm going to see her, her husband, her children, or anyone as a client. That doesn't work. There's too much intimacy. So would be curious if you have links on the research about therapying one's acquaintances. I've read it today. I'll find it and I'll try and send it to you for sure. So we can have a look at that. So I'll have a look and find it. You're really welcome. So the other thing we can have is a communal dual relationship. So a communal dual relationship is when we are members of a small community. And you know what? A lot of us are members of small communities. If you are LGBTQI, if you are kinky, if you are poly, your community is quite small. We need to remember that within the UK, for example, the amount of people who identify and come out, that's slightly different, who come out as LGBTQI is around 6%. 6% of the UK's population. That's it. And maybe less and more in different countries, but it's 6%. So with that 6%, that's a very fucking small community. And it goes down and down. If you add kink into it, it changes. Now that's people who are out. That's people who are actively saying, yes, this is who I am. It's probably more than that. It's like rape cases, isn't it? People don't say. Roughly how many therapists are there in the UK? I have no idea what the answer is to that. I have no idea. If anyone knows that, that'd be interesting. How many therapists are there in the UK? What's the average of how many clients would they deal with on a weekly basis? Now, that depends who you speak to. Don't ask me, I'll tell you, don't ask me that question. Right, so I talk to my supervisor a lot about this, and I have a very well-known good supervisor, so I'm very covered on this. I don't know how many therapists there are. The UKCP and the BACP talk about people having around 20 odd clients a week is what they recommend and say. However, what did it say? How many did it say? How many therapists there are? Because you can turn around and say, but lots of people aren't registered with bodies, and people can call themselves therapists even when they're not. So I don't know.
220,000?
220,000. Okay, so actually that's not a big percentage, is it, of people in the UK? I don't know about you, but anyone who's studying, it used to be, when I first started, 35% of therapists make it in as a business and as a living, working, breathing income. That must have changed recently. That has to have gone up because there are so many therapists needed by human beings. So in terms, 220,000 in the United Kingdom, highest amount in provided time interval. That's crazy, isn't it? That's a lot of people, but not enough. I was going to say that too. If people don't register, their data cannot be tracked. That's very true as well. Right. We also have a forensic dual relationship. That might mean forensically that we need to say something in court, or our notes are subpoenaed, because our notes can be subpoenaed depending on how you keep them and what you do. So we might be a witness, or we might be called on in trial to give some kind of evidence. We might have a supervisory dual relationship. So if I have somebody who is, if I'm a supervisor, they're not going to be my client, but you'll be surprised how many dual relationships people break as well. So we need to look for that. And I think that was a really good point that you just made about FM that my friend's mum is a therapist and her mum speculated being my therapist, but then immediately shot it down because we're far too close. Yes, exactly. It's too connected. That figure is only self-employed. So those employed by NHS or other organisations fall outside of that. Thank you, Poppy. Didn't know that. We might have some form of digital, online or social media dual relationship. That could be counted as a dual relationship as well. So it might be that they're on our Twitter, our LinkedIn, our Snapchat, or whatever else we've got nowadays. So there's a potential there for dual relationships. And there's sexual dual relationships when we have a romantic connection. If you change the password, Jerry, it will stop people coming in. I think I've stopped anyone else from joining anyway now, actually, so that's changed as well. So we know the APA and different governing bodies have now turned around and said there are no sexually intimate or romantic relationships that you can have with a client due to the conflict of interest. You've got to remember back in the olden days when you had Freud and different people, they fucked so many of their clients. That happened a lot, and it was brought saying it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. There is a really famous set of tapes called the Gloria tapes on YouTube. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the Gloria YouTube videos. And it's about one woman who decided to look at 3 different therapists, and she actually ended up sleeping with one of the therapists. Let's not go into that. And that's in my lifetime, because that was in the 60s. I'm 57 years old, nearly. So see if you can guess which one. Nikki, which one do you think it was? Not a very English sounding name. Fritz. Yeah, exactly. See, there we go. People know who it is. I was horrified when my lecturers mentioned that on my course. Yeah, exactly. Can you spell the word that you pronounce between social and relationship? What, the dual relationship? Sexual dual relationship or supervisory dual? Which one do you mean? Dual. So it's dual relationship, D-U-A-L. So it means that 2 relationships are happening at the same time between those people. So we need to be really aware of that. And that's something we need to have as kinky, polyamorous therapists, that we need to be looking at this to make sure that we are safe. You can also register with people like the Pink Register Therapy, the NCFS have one, so you can do kink and polyamory aware professionals. That's the CAP directory. However, a lot of these directories charge. So a lot of people will not register their name on them because of the charges. And it doesn't guarantee that somebody has some kind of the right sort of qualifications to do what we do. Big welcome to the Italian shrinks. Welcome, Italian shrinks. Andy says, I wonder how many notches on their bedpost that therapist was clocking up. When you look at people, especially starting out in the olden days, and you go back to, there were no rules. So it was a power dynamic. So what happened is a lot of people were naturally attracted to their therapist because we work with that a lot. There is a natural thing that happens when we work in therapy where we get some kind of projection and sexuality that comes into the room, and attraction can happen. And different therapists work with that in different ways. I'm a big believer in bringing it into the room, talking about it, working it through. Cinders, I dropped contact with someone as he told me that he formed a sexual relationship with his therapist. I'm in the UK, so it still happens at times. Also, I had many other reasons to cut ties with him. It was not a snap decision. I've heard of people on FetLife currently, it's not even in the olden days, currently, where people are actually sleeping with their therapist and vice versa. It is still happening, and it's difficult. And as Joey says, it's hard not to be attracted to someone that listens non-judgmentally or not to anything that you say and really hears you. Exactly, I agree with that. Transference and counter-transference. It's all about that sexual tension that's in the room between 2 people. However, as a professional, you have a brain. It's amazing what we can do with it. We don't have to act on it. Ethically, it's a minefield. Ethically, it just shouldn't happen. There's no question about it. It's not even about the ethics. I was told that of the therapists who slept with their clients, 17% fully believed it was just for their client's own good. I don't know where that figure comes from. It's an interesting figure, but fuck me, that's not good. How would I bring it into the room? So maybe if the client says something along the lines to me like, oh, I'm quite attracted to you, or you look very beautiful today, or have you done something different with your hair, or I've noticed you're wearing makeup. We have to watch ourselves. If we start to dress a little more or do things a little differently, we have to be aware that we are acting differently with our clients. That doesn't have to be brought into the room. That's for me to bring to supervision and to my own therapy. However, when the client starts to act differently and they say or do something, I would personally, Taryn, it depends what they say actually. I would personally say, what's going on between us? So what's happening here in the room? Because there are lots of things that can impact our relationship. And I can hear that there's some kind of attraction or something going on for you. What are you attracted to? Because actually, I don't really think it is about me. And I would start to talk relationally about what's it like to be heard? What's it like for you to be, to be understood for a change? And try and educate my client that they're coming from a perspective of wanting to be heard, and that's really special, or cared for, or appreciated, or listened to. So I work relationally. My training is DBT, transactional analysis, integrative, so humanistic. So I've got quite an interesting approach. However, all of that comes into the room, but I work relationally. What's going on between us? I don't always say, well, that happened to me in a session and I felt it as an attack. Okay, did it ruin the relationship for you, or eventually did you get somewhere because of it? Because that's the other thing as well. Sometimes there is an attack. I wrote a piece the other day and somebody said, that bit you've just written is about ADHD, when I said it's a trait. And I said, no, I didn't mention any form of diversity. I just spoke about neurotypical. And I said, I think you need to look at what's going on for you, that for you read it that way. Next time, Eunice, next time you hear that, point out that 15% of clients who have sexual contact with their therapist go on to make an attempt on their life. Own good as a crock. Jesus, that's a horrific statistic, isn't it? It is an absolute abuse of power. It really is. Unfortunately, it happens way more statistically in hypnotherapeutic relationships than any other form of therapy relationship. It's definitely more hypnotherapy than it is anything else. Andy says, I wonder if the client goes into a scenario thinking you're the only one who understands and starts an attraction. For definite, it's really magic to be heard, understood, to be helped, to be supported. And that gets transferred into sexual feelings. And as a therapist, that's an amazing opportunity for us to say, maybe that isn't sexual, not that bluntly. Maybe that isn't sexual. And to try and work with those feelings of what it's like to be heard and how magic that is, and how we don't always have to sexualize everything, that actually can be a form of real love and care between two people that isn't necessarily sexual. And Cinder says they shouldn't allow things to progress the level that they did by trannies. Sorry? Can we chuck Nikita out, please, Jerry? Fucking hell. Right. That sort of language, absolutely not okay. There is an ism there completely. Whoever's writing that, I'm really sorry. That person's already been moved once, so they're out. So we have to be very careful and aware of how it works for us. The good thing about the NCFS is that they have also some kink clinical practice guidelines that they've written for us as well. What's interesting is how many they've written. In total, their guidelines hit 23. 23 guidelines for kink, poly, queer therapists to have a look at. What they talk about in their guidelines, and it's really worth looking up. In fact, I'll send it to you now so you've got a copy of it. Nikita isn't a Nikita anymore, of course not. Just going to change so I can write this to everyone. So this is a link to the guidelines that they have. So the thing about these guidelines, Nikki, is that they come from the NCFS. So they're written by a group of people who are really active in trying to make queer, kink, and poly okay. They are very active. They are personally active themselves. What they're having a look at in all of these guidelines is that clinicians understand that kink is used as an umbrella term. It can mean a wide range of consensual and ethical behavior and intimate behaviors. It can be about fantasies, it can be about relationships, and it can be about identities. I like that as a guide. That's a good one. But we also have to be aware of our professional incompetence and our scope of practice when we work with this client base. What do we know? How do we go to a supervisor? How much help do we need when we start to look at this? Or do we need to refer that client on? One of the problems with being a therapist in this sort of scenario is that we need money. We are people who are in a business, we're often self-employed, and we're scared about making sure that we have enough money. So what happens for a lot of therapists, and it does happen a fair amount, is, oh no, I'll take any client. It's really important for us to look ethically is, can we work with that person and do we have enough knowledge? And there are plenty of opportunities out there for us to get this knowledge, supervisors being one of them. The guideline 3 states that clinicians understand that kink fantasies, interest behaviors, relationships, and/or identities do not indicate a psychopathology. I'm always going to think that's a good thing. It does not indicate that there is a psychopathology, a mental disorder, or the inability of any individual to control their behavior. Fuck me, that's a really good rule. I like that one. I think, one of the world's best therapists for 5 years. She changed my life. She was incredible. She's written books on transactional analysis. I adore everything about her because she's fucking brilliant. Apart from, she pathologized my kink and my poly all the time. And that really disrupted our relationship towards the end, because no matter what I said, I couldn't help her understand what that meant and how bad it was for me as a human being. So she was a fantastic therapist, but she said that if I'm kinky in some way, shape, or form, that there is something wrong with me. There must have been some trauma or something that went wrong for me as a child. So she pathologized and made it a mental health issue or some psychopathology. So she started to say that there's something wrong with me for being kinky, for being queer, for being polyamorous. Not so much for queerness, definitely around poly and around being kinky. What's interesting is guideline 4 then states, which I really like, clinicians understand that kink is not necessarily a response to trauma, including abuse. There we go then. Some of us might be born this fucking way. Now, a lot of people play something called bingo with me because I mention things all the time. One of my favorite hobbies to look at is genetics and epigenetics. I love epigenetics when it comes, and transgenerational scripting when it comes to therapy. So that is the messages and on a genetic level that have been passed down from generation to generation. So epigenetics impacts the next generation's experience of who they are because of what happened in someone else's past. I have often looked and still want to read it, but don't want to write it. I know it's really boring. I'm sorry, we are playing bingo. I was going to write a PhD on the transgenerational and epigenetic scripting of sexually submissive women, taking into account my mum, her upbringing, what happened to her, my grandmother and my great-grandmother. I would have used myself as that personal experience to have a look at. But hasn't there literally been research done that kinky people are no more likely to have trauma or mental health issues than vanilla people? Yes, a shit ton, Eunice. A shit ton of research. However, the research does prove things slightly both ways. When you look at mental health out in the world, we start making statements like 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue. I'm sorry, anyone here who works in mental health, do you think it's 1 in 4? Because I fucking don't. I think it's 2 out of 4, at least, sometimes 3. I have so many clients who are not registered at doctors saying they've got any mental health issues. I've got over 50,000 hours, which is quite a lot of hours nowadays. I think that's quite high compared to a lot of people over the years. And I would say the majority of my clients actually don't register for any tablets or anything else as well. So they're missed out of those statistics and guides because they don't want to go and they don't need to. Sometimes therapy is enough, and other times we need therapy and we need some form of medication. It varies. Right, so guideline 5 says clinicians recognize that kink intersects with other identities in ways that may shape how kink is expressed and experienced. So that means that we have other identities like being poly, like being queer, and being a group of people, because there's a hell of a lot of a crossover between those. It also says that kink can enable us and help us to actually facilitate exploration around our gender, around our relationship, and around our identities. It's a form of experimentation. It facilitates our exploration and enables us to have a look at what we are, who we are, and what that means. Eunice says, just living in society and our culture is enough to drive many people into mental unwellness. If you have a look at what's happened in the last couple of years with COVID as well, mental health has actually dramatically increased mental health issues. Vima says, in my practice, I have clients who question where their gender came from, and the same questions could be up for kink or polyamory. And my question to them is, but what now? Aren't you who you are, and are you okay with that? And usually they realize that they love who they are now. They are just held back by potential past, when sometimes presence is what heals. I really agree with that, Beam, and I really like that. And I think that's really important, because what a lot of us are is what I always say to my clients, great. So when we find out that when you were 4 years old, you were dropped on your head on a Tuesday afternoon, what now? If that's the cause of everything, what does that mean? And it's really interesting because people try to say, well, At least I'll know. And that will do what for you? Well, you know, fuck all is actually the eventual answer, isn't it? When we really get down to it, do we really need to know? However, when people are looking to know and they want the answer to that question, they're looking for a thought validation, where actually really they need to have a look at what they feel. That makes a real difference. Coming out as kinky worked wonders for my mental health. Yes, polyam, all of it, it really makes a difference. Eunice, if you lack resilience. Resilience is made up of all sorts of reasons for different people's experiences. Jacob, I think personal resilience only gets us so far. We need support systems and social support. We do. And it's really hard to come out. Some of us can't come out and say these things. Some of us can't. You know, it's a real privilege to have come out and have a family that's accepted you. It is a privilege. There are plenty of people who want to come out and make a difference, and they are not accepted. Their local society, their local culture don't help, don't do anything. And we have to think of everybody in this as well. Andy says, I would say that since finally, being on the scene has been a form of therapy for me, in a sense of being told for years that I'm on my own, that going to kink social events and meeting loads of great people finally made me feel actually I'm not on my own. I would add you into that, Debs. You've helped a lot in transition with your workshops. Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me. And it is, yes, I was just about to say that, Poppy. There is a real difference between something that is therapeutic and is therapy. And a lot of this stuff is really therapeutic for us, for our hearts, for our souls, and everything else as well. It makes a difference. Nikki, I'm a Samaritan, and there are a lot more people waiting for calls now than there used to be due to COVID and the lockdown. We are inundated, flooded. I'm more out with people at work than my family, of course, because that has a big difference, doesn't it? So one of the other things is that clinicians have to recognise how stigma, discrimination, and violence directed at people involved in kink, queerness, everything else as well, can affect health and well-being. The danger of coming out is still real. It's still huge. I live near Brighton. Brighton is supposed to be this queer capital of the UK, maybe alongside Manchester, and we're supposed to be totally out. We still have a lot of queer violence. There were two young men, it was only about 3 or 4 years ago, one was nearly blinded in the attacks that they suffered. And Brighton is supposed to be innovative and out there and everything else as well. It depends where in Brighton, and it depends who you meet. So this is the problem, isn't it? So it affects our health, our well-being, because we do suffer from violence and we do suffer from discrimination. As a therapist, we need to be aware of that personally, about how we're going to come out and what that means. And we have to be very aware of the therapeutic space. Is it relevant for me to come out to this client? Does it matter? Will it impact? Is it better that they know that I'm queer and poly? What is it? What's important in this relationship? And what we're always asking is we're talking about beneficence. What's for the best intent for the client? What's the best thing for this client to be aware of or to hear or to understand? That's what we're mainly asking here. I also found with Brighton that it's only really easier if you are in certain categories. I wonder what you mean by that. So my tutor at college, Nikki says, was verbally attacked with his partner. He doesn't go out into South End openly gay anymore. Breaks my heart. Eunice says, we don't like to acknowledge that even in queer, kinky, poly circles, there's still gatekeeping. There really is. And even therapeutically as well, there's a hierarchy. I'm out, I'm better than you, I know this better than you. We can see it in polyam and monogamy at the moment. There are so many programs. BBC wrote on polyamory 2 days ago. They did a whole article on it and they did a whole speech on it. And it was a great piece of news. Polyam isn't better than monogamy. It is just different. Queer isn't better than heterosexual. We're just different. We are who we are. Kink isn't better than vanilla. Fuck me, I hear that a lot. We're so much better at communication. We know more than anyone. We're more adventurous. We're so much better. There is a huge hierarchy within our own scenes and networks that impacts everybody else. And that needs to be broken down a little bit because that's not healthy. One of the guidelines is about understanding consent. I have an interesting take on consent. I have a huge writing on consent on FetLife that covers all the consent models are out there and things we can look at. Consent is being presented as the be all and end all, but it isn't. It isn't as good as everybody sees it as sometimes, and it's not as perfect. So we've got to be really careful about that because consent isn't everything. How was that consent gained? Was it coerced? How well is that person enabled to give consent? All of these things really matter. And as a therapist, it's really important that we understand that as part of the relationship that we have with a client as well. Check out the Pansy Project, planting pansies at the sites of homophobic attacks and raising awareness. I really like that, Rob. I've never heard of that. What a beautiful idea. I love that. Thank you for sharing. That sounds absolutely amazing. So it's important for us to stand. It's also important that kink can lead, poly can lead, being queer can lead to healing, to personal growth, to empowerment, so that we feel better about our lives. I think we also have to be careful sometimes. And I think one of the benefits of going to a kink active therapist or a very, very kink aware or kink friendly therapist is that it seems to be more okay for someone like me, because it's my lifestyle and has been for 40 years, that sometimes when we look at behavior that's really harming to our clients, we can say, tell me more about that. We can have an inquiry into the harming nature of it potentially to our clients, because we live it as part of our lives, versus somebody who's saying, we shouldn't do that, that's wrong, that's not okay, that's disgusting. So they get a lot of judgment. And we really have to watch that as well. We have to be very careful. So that's important too. So it's also understanding that, I don't know if any of you here are kinky or whatever, who queer, whoever you are, you realised at all sorts of ages. You really do live at all sorts of age. You found out who you were at 3, at 5, at 7. Some of you didn't know till you were 18. Some of you didn't know till you were married and in your 20s and thought, fuck, I don't like men. What have I done? Everyone realises at different stages, and there's nothing wrong with when people understand who they are and how they are. There's no age limit. There's no age criteria. And we've really got to watch. Well, you haven't felt like this since you were a child. We have to watch that as clinicians as well. So it can happen at any age. We also need to understand, really in my 40s, exactly, tits up, exactly, so much later. And isn't that cool? Oh, someone's put a link up to the Pansy Project. You should definitely click on that one. That sounds lovely. And Beamer says, yes, living it creates empathy. It does. It creates a different understanding. And also it helps with a relationship to say, oh, can you tell me more about what that is about for you? What do you get from that and why? And we can be really curious about that, rather than just saying, oh, why do you do that? What's happening? There is a different lived empathy. FM says, personally, I've had large realizations every few years where I've realized so much more about myself. With kink and being queer and maybe poly, and I'm sure that will keep realizing even more as I get older. Age brings us realization anyway. Add in different experiences and different aspects of life about ourselves. Isn't that wonderful? We can keep doing that. And life is about that, isn't it? It's about learning about ourselves and doing that. It's great. I think one of the things we have to be very wary of, and certainly one of the aspects that the guideline 13 covers, is just because you're into kink, or just because you're queer, or just because you're poly, does not mean you are a shit parent. It doesn't mean that you cannot parent. Fucking hell. The amount of grief even single parents get, it's really difficult. So we have to be very, very careful about, oh yes, but that will really damage your child. Will it? I think there are plenty of children out there who aren't doing well in heteronormative families and normal systems. Why will we do anything any worse in any different way? And that's something we have to be aware of as therapists. Dania says, is it Dania or Dania? Sorry, I'm Dania. More Italian? Don't know. Sounds that way. Is it Dania? Yes. Okay. Brilliant. Dania. I would like to share something. I don't take any patient in my town. I work online with my patients from every town of my country except where I live. It's necessary because you are right. The community is very small and there's too much endogamy. I used to have only one patient here and we negotiated boundaries for when we met at parties or events. Now she's no longer my patient and I have to confess that I feel relieved. I really understand that. We can meet casually without all that anxiety or fear to cross the border or ruin the therapeutic alliance. And I'm going to come to that one a little bit later as well. Parties, everything that we do and the things that we go to, dungeons, queer spaces, queer bars, all those things that we attend that have a massive impact on us. Andy says, I found that being social with kink really opens you up to meeting all sorts of people in all walks of life. I know it's cliched, but we're all just humans at the end of the day. Yeah, and there are good and bad humans. I know that as a therapist, I should say there is no such thing as a bad human. I've met a few, I think. I don't know how anyone else feels about that, but maybe that's personally, not as a clinician. So I think as well, one thing that's really taken off that I'm talking about is this whole conversion therapy and how anti everybody is about it because it's not illegal yet. Do you know what? You can also have really interesting aspects that come. I've spoken about this before. I had a client many years ago who came to me into my therapy room and she said, hi, I've heard a lot about you. I know that you're queer, so I thought I can ask this of you. Can you convert me, please? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I'm queer, I'm a lesbian, and I need converting. I've never had that before in my life in all the hours. They're clients, not patients. Yes, some people still use patients, some people still use clients, but mainly we use the word client nowadays. Nikki, I watched the Dr. Christian Cure Me, I'm Gay. I couldn't believe it. It's absolutely horrifying, isn't it? So this vulnerable young woman comes into my room who says, I cannot live my life because my family are all Christian and highly religious. Please, can you convert me? It's not just others that want to convert. Some of these young people also want to convert as well. And that's utterly terrifying to me. The absolute proof, it wasn't an ethical dilemma for me, actually. It wasn't. Ethically and morally, we know, and all the proof points towards it, trying to convert someone from who they are will always damage that person. It is not an option, it is damaging. And I told her that I wouldn't. I told her that I work with her on acceptance. I told her that I was happy to be open-minded. She could teach me about the Bible the same time as we had a look at who she was as a human being. And after about a year, 18 months, she was much more accepting of who she was, and it had made a real difference, which was magical. It made a real difference. Endogamy means that a lot of people know or dates with each other because poly, queer, kink community is very small. Everyone is someone's ex with you. Thank you. Eunice says, thing is, if conversion therapy really actually works that way, it'd be theoretically be possible to convert the other way from cishet to queer, but I've never actually seen anyone suggest that that was possible. Yeah, no, Vanya, your English is fantastic. Fuck me, you live in Italy. Congratulations. Listen, English people, we are really bad on generically talking about everyone here. We are really bad at languages. We do not try very hard. My mum is Swiss and she's Swiss Italian, Swiss French. So I have a mixture of those things. I used to go Diana Marino and different things all the time. And believe me, my dad's version of asking for a coffee in Germany or in Switzerland is eine cup of coffee or a cup of coffee. That's as good as he got. He never tried. So your English is bloody amazing. Do not put yourself down. It's incredible. Yeah, conversion therapy is an absolute no. And hopefully everybody has signed every petition they can get hold of, gone in and spoken to their MPs and sent letters and said, absolutely not. Conversion therapy is not an option. And when Boris Johnson, bless him, should we not bring politics into this room? Politics and therapy? Should we not put those two things in together? When Boris Johnson was looking at all of this, he then said, but it doesn't count for people transitioning. Fucking hell. Should we not bring trans into everybody? That's it. Nobody transitions for anything. Not a good idea. Even English are bad at English. That's very true. Fai benissimo, Dania. There you go. You've got an Italian message. So we have to understand, because for us as a group of people, what we also suffer from is internalized stigma, internalized oppression, internalized negativity. And that isn't a disorder. That's not evidence of a disorder. That's because of the distress that we felt all through those years and how we feel about those things. So it's really important that we have a look at that. And as a clinician, we need to have a look at our own biases, our own values, our own attitudes towards anybody who is kinky, queer, or anything else as well. And it's really important to look at all of your prejudices, because everybody has some form of prejudice in their life, some way, shape, or form. All people, all men, all women, all this, all that. People are very guilty of that, and we do that quite a lot. I was a clinical supervisor and a clinical supervisor and training director in an eating disorders clinic in London for 4 years. Bless Boris is the most offensive thing I've heard you ever say, Debs. Yeah, sorry. So I was working there, and it was up 3 flights of stairs, and a new therapist came in who wanted to do a placement, and she walked in and she said, fucking hell, how do the fat people get up those stairs? That's what she actually said. And I said, I really appreciate that you're here to train. Before I even let you train, we need a very long conversation about what you've just said and trying to understand why the fuck you went there. And I wouldn't let her train. It was her immediate response. She went, well, I don't mean anything offensive by it. I just meant it must be really hard for fat people to get up the stairs. And I said, what? So is that as difficult as somebody who's got chronic anorexia, who has no energy? Did you know anything about any of it? And it was really interesting. It was absolutely horrific. And actually, in the end, she didn't pass the training, as it goes. So we have to look at our own biases towards human beings and what that means. So we also have to understand what stereotypes are like, you know, all queers, all gays, you know, all dykes, all like, oh my God, we're all just one thing, aren't we? Completely, that's what we are, all kinky people. And there's a lot of things around kink being related to perversion. And perversion often comes in. Even though I'm out, I was outed a couple of years ago. And when I was outed on Facebook, what happened was, because I was working in cheerleading quite a lot and I was working with children, there was a picture of me sitting on the floor with my legs crossed underneath me with this much flesh showing an inch above my knees. I had over the knee boots and I had a shorter dress on and I had about this much flesh showing. And what was said was, don't let this woman near your children in cheerleading. She is a danger to children. Publicly written with my photograph and my website. When was that? Anyone remember? I have spoken about it. I think it was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. Kinky, not kinky, queer, not queer, whatever. We're all human. We are. And it was absolutely horrific. I got the police involved in everything. It was horrendous. However, the people I were working with all knew that I was kinky, all knew that I was queer. They all knew that I was poly. Because I'm out, it actually helped me in that scenario. And the woman who was in charge of the workshops, it turned out to be a guy who wanted to do my job and wanted to do these workshops. He went for me. So we do have to be aware that it can be used to attack us. And we have to be aware it can be used to attack our clients as well. So we need to think about these things. We make sure that we really understand the difference between intimate domestic partner violence and consent. Because sometimes some of that can actually coexist with kink active relationships. Abuse does happen in kink as well. So we need to be very aware of that. I was writing about that today, about things to look for and what that means. So we need to be very aware that we don't confuse them and see intimate partner violence, domestic violence as kink or kink as that. And we need to understand the boundaries between the two and what it means. That's really important for us to understand. Must have been awful. It was fucking horrific. Well, see, that's not true, actually. What happened is for about an hour, I went, oh my God, I've just shit myself and I feel terrible for about an hour. And then when I managed to calm myself down and make some phone calls, actually, it was pretty good. It was okay. But I did get a lot of messages. It didn't affect my business. It didn't affect my reputation. It actually impacted theirs more in the end because I was also able to stay quite calm in response. Thank you very much for your concern. Please, could you take that down? The police have been informed and they will be in touch with you for the defamation of character and all the other things that you were allowed to say legally. I was very calm about it. Wasn't really. I was shitting myself, pissing myself, and my heart was doing about 300 beats a minute. He was not the person for the job. I agree. I agree. This is why the legal nonsense is so devastating. It hurts the real victims. I have to hope people are sensible in practice. Yeah, we have to be very careful. I was doing... So I was at the Link, don't know if anyone knows where the Link is, but it's a therapy training center. And I was teaching some supervisors and I gave them a real life scenario. I gave them a real life scenario about somebody who had transitioned. Did that matter? It did later. Somebody who was also submissive and a situation that they were in. And they'd gone to this dominant male and blah, blah, blah. And I gave them this scenario and I said, what would you do? So it was one of those scenarios, what would you do? And 8 out of the 9 said they would call the police. I did not call the police. The police weren't necessary. I worked with this human being and they were able to work away and do different things and decide themselves as to whether they wanted to go legal or not. But a lot of us jump into that, even as clinicians as well. And I understand I haven't given you the whole story there, but I haven't given you the whole story because it's a personal story to that person. So we have to make sure that we promote ourselves when it comes to learning, do all the CPD that we can, do the workshops that we can, do the reading. And there are some great books out there that we can look at. It's very important that we look at how do we bring ourselves into the therapeutic space? How do we work with you as a human being and me as a human being, 2 of those people meeting in that room, and do my needs impact yours? Do I need to say, oh, I'm kinky too? Why? We have to learn to see those things through. What does it matter if that person knows or not? Now, near enough everyone who comes to see me knows that I'm kinky and queer. Over here, we have mandatory report requirements when to inform police. We do too, to a certain extent with safeguarding. This did not meet any of safeguarding requirements whatsoever. It met none. None. There was no danger to this adult in any way, shape or form. it was because what he said and how it worked. Do you feel that that can help in the therapeutic relationship? That what can help? That me being the same as that person? Yeah, yes, of course, sometimes it can. But if I'm only bringing it up because I go, oh yeah, no, I'm queer too, or I'm kinky too, how does it help in that moment? The other person is really talking intensely about themselves. So if I bring it in on a nothing, I don't think it's helpful. If it's already in the room, it can be helpful. And sometimes it can be in the way of the relationship as well. Because one of the dangers can be, well, I'm queer, I get it. I'm kinky, I get it. I'm poly, yeah, I know what you mean. And I've made these huge assumptions instead of saying, can I ask what that means to you? What's that like for you to experience? What's going on for you? So we have to be really careful because it can go both ways, especially when we are kinky, poly, and queer. Oh, I know, I've had that happen to me before. Have you? But that person hasn't. I don't know what it's like for you. I need to understand what it's like for you as a human being, not the other way around. So we really have to familiar ourselves with what's out there and what it means and what it looks like. Do you feel that that's why someone comes to you because you're similar to them? Yeah, sometimes. And I think sometimes it can really help. Sometimes it can really make a difference. It can also get in the way. I have to be conscious of that as a practitioner to make sure it doesn't go either way. Do you feel that's why, can it saying I experience that too help or hinder maintaining empathy? I think it can go either way or the other. It's about the propriety of the moment. And it's about the relationship that you've got with that person. So it can hinder or it can help. And that makes a big difference. I'm sorry, I really have to go now. It's very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you too. So we have to be really careful about these things, about the stigma that's created and what we do. So being a professional and learning is really important. You can do courses in all sorts of ways, shapes and forms. There are loads in the pink therapy out there. There are loads of workshops that you can go to that make a real difference. I had a therapist who kept referring to her grandchildren having similar problems. I stopped seeing her. Yeah, look, it's called pocket clienting when we bring up an example of something that we've maybe experienced ourselves, or we have a client who's experienced it as well. So sometimes people will bring something up and say, oh, I understand what that's like. But if the person keeps doing it, it can actually get in the way of the relationship and actually causes more good than bad. It really does. So if we are kinky and queer and we're out there, one of the things we have to be really careful of and start to look at is our social media, our presence on social media, but also all the stuff that we go away. So I've prepared some of this so I make sure I remember all of it. It's really important that we lock our social media or we have some form of private profile instead of a public profile when we're on things like FetLife or dating sites as well. We've got to be really careful. I mean, Opal Fruit's a really good example of that. So is Cosmic. I'm on Field and they both came up in my feed as people I could see. By Lindsay Lou. So they came up as people I could see. Well, they're people I know, I'm not going to see them, but it's a real danger. I've also had it with clients. So clients' identities came up and different things about them. And it's really important. I think in that scenario, for me personally, it doesn't mean that I have to bring it into the therapy room. It doesn't mean anything. It means that I just can leave that. I've seen it. I don't click on it. I don't need to look. That's really important for us to look at as well. So have your own social media policy. In fact, having your own policy, your own statement about your own professional boundaries is really important. Keep different usernames for kink and private things if you need to. It does make a big difference, doesn't it? It's interesting. If any of you are in therapy here, if you're a therapist, if you were to see your client or your therapist's details on a dating site, would you want to click? Would any of you feel like clicking or wanting to have a look at their photographs and different things? Some people will come in with, fucking hell, no, I don't want to know. And some people go, well, I'm a little bit curious. Beamer, yes, my Insta sex ed page, not personal page, has a therapy policy and my therapy contract has an Insta policy. Yeah. Love yous anyways, Deb. We don't need Field. Thank you. But it's really important, isn't it, that we have to be aware that there is a professional boundary. On my FetLife profile, as the kink shrink, it clearly states, please tell me if you want to see me in the first line of the message as a therapist, because I will not I will not click on your profile. I do not want to see. I don't want to see the pictures. I don't want to know any of that. Therapeutic relationship is about two people meeting and having a conversation, which is completely different. We have seen our tutor on the kink scene, can't mention it to her, it doesn't feel right. Oh, that's interesting. But I think if you've got a tutor, it's quite interesting to bring it up. It might be important actually, and it's quite a good indicator of how someone will handle that. I don't know. That's interesting. What should you do if you are a community organizer and you've been known for being in the kink poly quiz before you train as a therapist? Eunice, I don't think it has to matter. So I think the thing that's important here is I'm really well known as being in the community, and I am a therapist. And actually, it hasn't created any issues apart from I need to be aware of the dual relationship around power. Because I've got followers and things, for what it's worth, it's not worth anything at all. It doesn't mean anything to me, but it does to other people sometimes. So if you are already in the kink scene and you train as a therapist, the only thing I would say is don't see people that you know on the kink scene. Don't see people that are in your dungeons. Advertise and see people slightly out of your area. That's the only thing I would say. That can make a real difference. That's what I would be doing anyway. It is a violation of their privacy. Cuff there, I agree. Poppy says, I avoid searching, but if people add me on FET, I'm okay with it. I don't go looking and I don't actively avoid. Nikki says, really? What about bringing it up? Well, you're training, which is very different to a therapeutic relationship. I don't know, other therapists, what would you do here? What are your thoughts on that? And people who are training, what would you do on that? What do you think? I've locked the CEO of the company I've blocked on Facebook. Yeah, I don't blame you. We have to be very careful on places like Facebook. Really lock all of your stuff so that clients and other people can't see, because they do look us up. They will have a look. They will have a difference. There's a really good book called Becoming a Kink-Aware Therapist. It's a good book. It's one that's worth reading. It's worth having a look at. It makes a real difference. I think bringing everything into a room is really important as a therapist. How do we bring it in? If something comes up, you can show understanding. You don't have somebody says, oh, well, you know, because I'm in a throuple, and I just go, okay, cool. So 3 of you, just showing a little bit that I know and understand. And I might say, so is that throuple kind of like a V, or is it a triad? Like, how does your throuple work? So I might show that I have some understanding by some of the words that I use, rather than saying, oh my God, that's cool, I'm poly too. There are ways of saying and doing things that are much more beneficial for the people around us. I think we really have to be aware of that. It's important. It's really important. So we have to bring it into the room. And I do think having a statement, and Bina, it's great that you've got a statement. I really like that. So let's have a look at some of the interesting examples that I've had where things go horribly wrong. I've been in a therapy room with somebody, as I said earlier, who turned around and said, I'm sleeping with so-and-so. I've slept with so-and-so. Now what? It's an interesting one, isn't it? Cinder says, our privacy settings within social media are important too if you want to lock things down. Images will show in a Google search, for example, and will often lead to the web page, whether that be LinkedIn or FetLife. Yes, we have to be careful about what we do. So I'm in the therapy room. I've been seeing this person for quite a few months, and it turns out they turn and say, by the way, I'm sleeping with so-and-so. That sort of thing can happen in this very small community. Debs, I had some sessions with you quite a while ago, but although I paid your standard fee, I think in my head I was seeing you as a friend who could help in a professional capacity rather than my therapist. Yeah, I think when we spoke about it at the beginning, we talked about life coaching more than therapy and therapeutic process. And it was before I really got to know you. Now, as a friend afterwards, it's been enough years that I can say you are my friend. So they say on average it's around 3 years when you can be friends. So I've got a lot of old clients who are studying to be therapists and all of those sort of things, and that makes a difference as well. And 3 years is around that registered time that we recommend for people. And one particular I'm thinking of, who now comes to me for a bit of help and advice, and we're 5 years later. So I took that to my supervisor. Everything I do, I check in supervision, however I do it. And it's really important that we do that, really important. So this client turns around and says, I'm sleeping with so-and-so, when that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's someone I've slept with in the past. What do you do? What do you do in that scenario? It's really important for me to weigh up in that moment the relationship that we're in, the fragility of that relationship and that person, and my personal situation. I checked with my supervisor, who said the same as me. I had to bring it up in the room. There was no way I could let that go. I need to inform you that I have actually had a form of relationship with that person, and I think I'm going to need to refer you to somebody else. You need to go. I don't want to go and see somebody else. It's not ethically or morally acceptable for me to carry on seeing you. And actually what I wanted to say was, fucking hell, why didn't you tell me 3 months ago? Because for all that time it'd been going on, but that's also not to be brought into the therapy room. I've had another situation, for example, where I was at a fetish fair outside. I'd had a new strop made with some pound coins drilled into it. And I told some of you this before. Could it be it's not just a conflict of interest, it's a bias now. I have something else going on. I've had a relationship with that person. I've had intimate knowledge of that person, and the bias changes in the room if they start to talk about them or bring them in. So I can't ethically carry that on. It just doesn't work. I bought this strop and I was at an outside fair. I was carrying it. I was about to put it in a bag, and somebody who is my client, I didn't even see them come over. I didn't know that they were there. Came over and went, oh my God, hi Deb, what have you bought? Pulled it out of my hand and walked a few paces away with it. Turned round and said, as a therapist, so I have agreements with all of my clients. What do we do when we meet at a kink fair or a party or anything else as well? So that's partially negotiated. Do you want me to say hi? How do you want me to act? Do people need to really never know that you're my client? So everybody has their own arrangement with me as to how that looks and what that means. And what's interesting is she said, I don't care if anybody knows. Well, that's quite interesting. So she pulls the strop and she gives me back the hand. She said, can you hit me with it to see what it feels like? Ethically, what do you suggest right now? What do we do in that scenario? It's really interesting. And I said, actually, no, I think that's inappropriate. Absolutely not. And I asked for it back. She gives it to her partner who hits her with it. Now, and I'm not kidding when I say it even made her bleed slightly. So her blood is on my toy now. That's interesting, isn't it? An absolute crossing of boundaries. I took it back. I walked away. I didn't say anything. But the next session we had, I brought it up and said, what was going on there between us? What was happening there? Like, you are my client. That was so inappropriate. Why did you push for that? And that's somebody who then went on to do a 2-year post-grad course as a psychosexual psychotherapist and is active on the scene currently. Absolutely broke some of those boundaries. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? That felt very out of order to me. I've also had my toy was contaminated. Yeah, I did have to wash it out in very certain ways. I was not happy. I've also had situations where, for example, if I'm seeing a submissive human being, that their dominant has said to me, I want to interview before I see them. What do you think of that? We brought it up. In the end, the therapy relationship broke down after that completely because I held some boundaries with them around them turning up on a day. My cutoff time is 15 or 20 minutes, 15 nowadays. They turned up at 40 minutes later and said I should still have a phone call with them, and they went mad and said that I was unprofessional because I held boundaries because I wouldn't talk to them. So the relationship broke down anyway. So can you be interviewed? Nikki, no. This is an interesting one. If somebody is really worried about someone's safety, the last time I had some therapy, I was open about my BDSM tendencies. I was recommended someone who I had 20 sessions with. So then we told I'm not specialized in this. It felt like I had my legs chopped off, and it's put me off going through the whole assessment scenario again. Most people in the NHS will either not have any awareness or any qualifications, or even if they do, they will not say that they do because their job could be in danger. That's the problem with the NHS. If you go privately, completely different kettle of fish, or go through a different system, or go through an LGBTQI friendly situation or charity. That makes a real difference as well. So again, this scenario with this person asking for a friend, seriously, they have potential kink couple who wish to remain kinky during the sessions, dom and sub. They question if this could even work in therapy. I'm going to come on to that one in a minute, Beam, and that's a fucking good question. I like that one. It was private. Go to the pink register or ask some of us, because one of the best ways to do it is to be referred to somebody that we know. Honestly, it's one of the best ways. So can somebody interview? I was speaking to my supervisor about this the other day, funny enough, because we were talking about the differences. If a dom is interviewing me to say, you won't change them, will you? They're still going to be my sub. Absolutely not. If they're worried about someone's safety or have concerns, are you the right sort of person to talk to our family? And can we have some joint sessions and some separate sessions? Then yes, I will do that sort of situation. There's a different feel to the questioning there. A really different feel to the questioning. And when you are a couples therapist, if you have qualified as a couples therapist and done another extra couple of years, as a couples trained therapist, you can see the couple and you can see them both individually for maybe 5 or 6 sessions, not many more than that. So just a few either sides to help. But one of the things I always come up with when I'm doing that is I will not hold secrets for you. How would you go about asking their intent? Exactly like that. Can you tell me what your intent is? What is your reason for wanting to meet me? What is it you want to ask? And I have a couple of questions. I'd be happy to recommend someone. Cinder says, would you like me to send you the info via FetLife message? Up to you to answer. Right, and Beamer's question, asking for a friend. They have a potential kink couple who wish to remain kinky during the sessions, dom and sub. They question if this would even work in therapy. My answer is no. My answer is, in a session, I'm meeting 2 people, even I know that their relationship is unequal outside. So to give you an example, I can have couples who can tell and say, don't do this, don't do that, you need to do that. That's okay, I kind of put up with that. But if it's get over my knee and have a spanking, or go over there, or sit at your sir's feet, no. How can I work with 2 unequal relationships in the therapy room? They need to be equal, and it's really important. I will work with anyone as a next of kin or concerned party with the consent of my client gained one-to-one, and I respect dynamics, but they stay outside of the therapy space. So Poppy agrees with that, and so does Beamer. It's really important to make sure that we see these people as, but the problem is a lot of people will allow it, and I wouldn't. It's an absolute no for me. It's really important that we turn around and say, I'm seeing you as equals. You both need to be able to talk and not worry about what you're about to say, whether it's going to offend somebody. In couples therapy that's vanilla, or in polycule therapy, depending on the size, there is always going to be an implication for people for saying something. There's always a consequence. As soon as we say something, there's a consequence. So that's also what I agree as a couples therapist in the room about consequences outside, what that means, especially with kink relationships. It is not okay for somebody in the therapy room who is kinky to be punished for what they said in the therapy room afterwards. There cannot be that level of major consequence. So when I'm seeing a couple, there cannot be a punishment for what was said in the therapy room. Whatever was said in the therapy room is something that needs to be processed, spoken about, and done. That's a very different way of doing it. It isn't for everybody, but I think that's really important. I've also had a situation where I was about to see somebody, and they said, can I just check the connection? And I said, yes, sure. You okay? She went, yeah, we'll be there in a minute. And I said, hang on, what do you mean we? It was individual therapy. And she said, oh, my dom's with me. And I said, no, this isn't couples therapy. Couples therapy has a completely different price, completely different time. No. And she said, well, no, it's all right, because you know him. And I went, no, okay, no, this is getting worse. What do you mean I know him? And she said, well, it's so-and-so. And I said, no, hang on. He gave me, he was a person who said, can you see this person? And I said, does she have anything to do with you? Are you in a relationship with her? Is there any connection? Absolutely not, he says. It's his sub. So he's actually, interestingly, brought his sub in. And she said, I work in mental health. I should be allowed to have whoever I want in the room. And I said, oh my God, there are so many dual relationships going on here. I cannot work this way. Well, then give me my fucking money back. You've wasted. She got so angry about this relationship setup. It's really important, again, for me to hold a boundary as to what's right and what's wrong in that scenario. If someone is being punished, how can things be resolved? Exactly, Andy. It's really important. And Carrie says, no, absolutely not. It's really important. I think as well, there's some really good books out there if you want to be a therapist. There's a new zine out, slightly new, that came out a little while ago, which is called Kink and Trauma, BDSM as Self-Care. That was quite a good zine that came out. Boren Gallant, I think that was by, I'd have to remember. Becoming a Kink-Aware Therapist is a great book. It's slightly older. It's not that new, but it's pretty good. It's worth reading. And they even have an online training forum now as well, the 2 of them, called Kink Knowledgeable, which is good as well. It's very US based. Tashra is a really good organization for you to do any of their, they do courses and they do one-offs and weekends and different times that you can go and have a look if you want to learn something. The Pink Therapy Group also do all sorts of different courses, down from a 1-year course, a 2-year course, and even the odd weekend and different CPD that you can do. And there are lots of other books that are all about kink and BDSM. I think you should publish your reading list on a weekly basis as a blog, you know, because you don't post enough. I know, I've only done 1 or 2. So there is also a book called Safe, Sane and Consensual. As a title, I don't agree with SSC anymore. So within kink, there are acronyms that people use, and I don't think a lot of what we do is safe. This is a little bit like the therapy room. We say this is a safe space. Is it? Because I felt really unsafe in therapy before. What I know is that a boundary space. I know that, you know, it has this boundary around it, but I might feel unsafe within that space. And I don't think some of the things we do as kinksters or as poly people and queer people actually are always particularly safe. I think we have to be very careful about that word safe, and it's not very sane, some of what we do. I prefer acronyms like risk aware and personally responsible. They are much better acronyms. So RAC and PRIC, they're much better acronyms for me, rather than the whole safe, sane and consensual. And there's a really good book called Leading and Supporting Love. And that's about DS relationships. That's quite good. So that's more about power imbalances, if you want to have a look. Therapy sessions equal a safe base from which to explore. Yes, they're a contained space. I prefer that word. This is a contained space within which you may not always feel safe and you are exploring things. I have a slightly different take on that, I guess. I would really have a look anytime at the NCSF library. They have a load of things that you can read and have a look at. Loads of papers there as well. So, and they are really great. And they are really fighting for the acceptance of kink, actually, as a form of okayness. And so, speaking of feeling safe, thank you, Jerry, for dealing with that person to me earlier. Wow, that threw a bit of a wobble. Thank you, team. Was that someone I was aware of, or was that someone you extra went in on? Today has been the most bizarre session I've ever done in 2 and a bit years. Do you know what, Nikki? You asked that question earlier and I missed it, didn't I? So I really apologise. Do you think a cis person can work within the LGBTQI and GDSR communities effectively? Do you know what? It's really interesting, that one. Can we? As a therapist, can I work with somebody who has depression if I'm not depressed? Can I work with somebody who has anxiety if I'm not anxious? Can I work with somebody who has body dysmorphia or dysphoria if I've never felt that? That's a difficult one, because that is what therapists are supposed to do. We are supposed to work with people who maybe we haven't experienced that or had it. Do I think there's a different understanding from somebody who, I think if the cis person understands their privilege and understands where they're coming from, there's potential for them to work there. However, what you find is a lot of people now come in and say, I want a poly person, I want a queer person, I want a woman, I want a man, I want trans, I want. So people are having a lot more choice. So I think it depends on the person, as long as they understand their privilege. However, therapeutically, therapists don't necessarily suffer from whatever that means. I fucking hate that sort of stuff. I've not necessarily experienced personally everything that you've had as my client. So sometimes I can still work effectively within that. That's an interesting way to look at it. Thank you. Oh, Andy, I remember that message. It seems that some people have too much time on their hands to troll these sessions. We've never had it before, have we? I've never been trolled like that. It's been whoever gave that out, I should shoot. And I really would like to know where that went and why. So I think we have to really understand. There is a lot of current research and really the benefit of lived experience in all fields of mental health. It applies here, I think. Yeah, and I'd agree with you. So I think if the cis person can really understand their privilege and maybe look at, they are a bit more flexible than they think, then there's a possibility. Overall, my experience of having the most brilliant therapy for 5 years with my therapist was amazing, but it was really difficult underneath with this nuance of pathologizing and dislike for me being kinky. Beamer says, difficult when there's not enough queer therapists, but said therapists would need to do their research just like they would on anything else they don't understand. Also, a lot of queer folk come to therapy about something else and not their identity. Exactly, which is what I said at the beginning, didn't I? Like, you know, not all queer folk come because they're queer. Not all perverts come because they're perverts. Like, I would like to talk to you about my depression, but I don't want my kinkiness to get in the way. I'd like to talk to you about my anxiety, but I don't want my queerness to get in the way. Now, look, we also know that they may have something to do with it. They may be coping mechanisms, they may be many things, but it's really important. Never since I started sitting in the trolling has never happened. I'm digging about online to see if I can find the source. Thank you, that's really kind of you. Yeah, it's been a very strange one. I feel very discombobulated, but hopefully it's made some sense. One of the things somebody asked me as well is, how do I assess a relationship with a client as to how well they're doing or what's happening? There are lots of assessment tools that people can use. Essie, if you have any links to that current research, that would be grand. Sinners, thanks, I think, to change your password. Yeah, I'm going to have to change it, aren't I? Which is such a pain in the arse, but I will. We use a variety of instruments, potentially, as mental health practitioners. However, there are different rules and regulations for different people to use at different times. Some bodies absolutely require that you use a tool at the beginning of therapy, at the beginning of the session, at the end of the session, at the beginning of 6 weeks, at the end of 6 weeks, and all those things. And they have a real variety of, this is what you have to do. The problem is, is how many tools there are. There are so many tools. So I decided to look up how many tools there were earlier to see. There is CBT, skills access. It's more than that. There are fucking hundreds, I found out. There are hundreds. It's not just the basics. There are hundreds. There's a cognitive therapy rating scale. There's a therapy scale revised. There's collaborative case conceptualization rating scales. There's drinking motives questionnaires 1 and 2 in adolescents. There's dependency questionnaires. There's Maudsley addiction profiles. Honestly, I could read them all to you. There are hundreds. And there are some very basic ones that people use around depression and everything else as well. The problem is with a lot of these scales is they're very designed to be very specifically around depression. That's really what they've been based on because of the past. I don't use any form of scale whatsoever. There's an inventory for everything. There really is. Severity measure for social anxiety, assertive inventory, autism spectrum, and social communication disorders, body dysmorphics. There are 12 of those. Bipolar, there are 4 of those. Depression, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Dissociation, there are 4 of those. Eating disorders, there are 7 of those. Grief, there are 3 of those. Hoarding, there are 2 of those. Intolerance of uncertainty, there's 1 of those. Mindfulness, there are 3 of those. Motivation, dysphonia. OCD, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pain, chronic pain, personality disorders, clinical administration. There are all these things. We like a fucking scale. I agree with you. Autism spectrum, Q discussion on conversion therapy. Again, I'd agree with you. Neither do I. So what I actually want to do when I'm in therapy is I'm going to ask the person, how are we doing, what's happened? And I go on observation. So I was talking to somebody today who said something and I said, God, listen to you. And she said, what do you mean? I said, you'd never have said that 3 months ago. Can you see how much you've come on? And can you see the fact that you've made a decision and you've held a boundary there? And she was like, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? I'm so proud of myself. That for me is part of the recognition as to what we're doing and how we're working together. I don't miss this. Yeah, because you used to work with them, didn't you? Me neither. And Jay says, after filling the form so many times, you know what to put to get the right response. And that's part of the problem. So when somebody, see, also what isn't taken into account here is especially if I'm working in a queer environment, a kink environment, or a trauma-based environment, that person might fawn, that person might want to please. And that comes into the form as well. So somebody can turn around sometimes and fill out a form and say, see, Deb, aren't I a good girl? Aren't I doing better? Aren't I a good boy? Look, I'm doing better. And they're not really being real about that. So I personally don't use any of these tools because I don't think they're particularly brilliant. I understand why doctors use them to see where we are. Jesus, if I talk to someone for 10 minutes, I can see where they are. And that's the benefit of personal therapy, a private therapy that isn't under the NHS. They could do the same thing verbally in session 2. We do though, don't we? In some way, that's exactly what we do. We're ascertaining where this person is by listening to their story. But their story can take up to 2 or 3 weeks, I have to say. Anna says, I have to do a depression one every month. I had a horrible couple of weeks and was all, this one is going to be really bad. It wasn't. It literally made me feel better. It was still better than my first one. See, that's good. And that shows it can really work. And what that's shown you as well is that how you come on and what the difference is. That's when they can be really positive. I personally don't use them because of this sort of impact. So because I work privately, I don't have to. I take all my clients to, I'm so pleased you said this. Well, I wouldn't take me as doing it right. That's just my opinion on it and how I work. But I take all my clients to supervision. I have regular supervision and I work out where I'm going, and I don't need a scale because I can give you a synopsis of where each client is, what it looks like, what they've presented with, what the idea is for treatment, what that looks like, how we can enable the person to go forward and what that means. My therapist was supposed to do them NHS, but he agreed with me. We didn't like them, so we didn't bother. Some people have to in order to show their work. That makes a difference as well, but it's not something I ever want to use. It's not for me. So I think it's really important as well, if you're going to work as a kinky therapist, you have to be really aware of the law and really aware of your rights, especially around poly and kink. Is that using your clinical judgment, Deb? Yeah, if I've got any. Yes, it is. I do have a lot. FM says, I'm doing therapy with a charity right now where I have to fill in every few weeks, but the form is multiple choice and it only has like 10 questions. It's not vast enough, like, okay, I feel worse this week or maybe better, but it's not related to the long-term effects of therapy. No, but what they're looking for is some kind of trend eventually, some kind of change, which shows that they're doing a good job. And this for me is like school exams, honestly. When we give a child an exam, what they're really trying to do when it's those school tests is they're trying to show that the school's good, not that the person is okay. So for me, a lot of these things are often about, am I doing a good job as a clinician? Is the NHS working? Is this system working? Rather than how is this person that's in front of me and how are they feeling about themselves, which is way more important. So again, I think we have to be really aware of the law. As therapists, we are governed by certain laws that turn around and say, how do we report things that are safeguarding issues or legal? The problem is if you're going to work with somebody who is kinky, the chances are that they're breaking the law nearly all the time. So the law states within kink that you cannot leave more than a trifling or transient mark. Now, ironically, if even you're working with adolescents, or if you've had one, and I've said this before in many a therapy session and in workshops, is if you have a love bite, that is more than a trifling or transient mark. You have technically broken the law with a love bite. So we have to be really aware of this stuff. If the person you are dealing with has marks and bruises and all sorts of things as well, of course we have to ask if they're okay. We have to ask if things were consented to. But it's not something to go to the police about because it's a consenting relationship. So we as therapists have to be very careful around that and think about what am I going to take to the law here and what wouldn't I? And I would hope that we wouldn't take that to the law because it's really important. So I think we have to be aware, and we also have to be aware of poly rights as well, multiple relationships, especially if someone is married, depending on the conservatism of the area that we're working in, and also how that person is. And difficult though with CNC and how to manage that as a therapist. If I would discuss what CNC means to the client, I would say, how did you come to CNC? What does it look like? What does it include? Because I don't think CNC covers everything ever. I don't think there's any such thing as perfect CNC. We all have limits. If a person said, I'm going to stop you from working, give you a rosebud instead of a normal asshole, and this, that, and the other, so there are implications. Harm minimization is reporting situation to authorities going to cause the client and or other people more or less harm and not informing the authorities. So CNC is consensual non-consent, Nikki. So that's when somebody's in a relationship that says, you can do anything you want to me. However, if two people have just met and they do CNC, they need a good slap. That's the first thing I'm going to say. You do not jump into CNC. It's ridiculous. You need long conversations, just like you would in any relationship, to say what's okay and what does that mean. So we need to make sure that we aren't jumping in and saying, that's, you know, that's fine. As a therapist, I'm still going to say, if someone says, I've met him, we've moved in, it's only been 2 days, we've got CNC, I've stopped work and I'm not allowed to vote or do anything. I'm going to have a conversation about that with my client. I'm not sure if that's particularly healthy. So I want to understand what's going on for that person. Reporting involves supervision. Yeah, absolutely. Always go to your supervisor. Can't remember who asked relived experience research, but this is a good overview document put together by a third sector organisation that talks about what Nottingham Uni are doing. I've read that. So yeah, I think I read it earlier today as well, actually, ironically. So it's really important that we understand what all these terms mean. So if we've got someone saying, oh yeah, I'm into CNC, but are you into CNC with that person? Do you mean anything? Could that person break your rib? Do you really mean that? Could that person break your cheekbone? Do you really mean that? And actually what you will find is, honestly, that CNC doesn't always exist the way people think it does. Oh, okay, so I can touch your children. Well, no, of course not that. Oh, okay, so it's not CNC. Well, yeah, but CNC doesn't include my family. Okay, so it just includes you two. Okay, so if your family are around and I need a blowjob, let's say if we're talking about male, female, and just stick with that for a second, we can do that in the kitchen. Well, no, because my family are around. That would be inappropriate. Okay, so it's not really CNC, is it? Yeah, but my partner wouldn't do that. And that's where we come into it. The truth of the matter is, we get into something like consensual non-consent when we've got agreements, we know what they would and wouldn't do, and we know what we're actually saying yes to. Whenever I hear someone say, I have no limits, what I hear is, I have no imagination, or I have no brain. Of course you have limits. We all have limits, and I'm pretty out there. Is there a book where they have all these terminologies? Oh, it might be in quite a few books. You'll find it online. I think I've written about them as well many years ago. You can investigate, speak to anybody. In fact, I did a workshop, didn't I, on all poly and BDSM. I did a whole glossary. I did all the acronyms in every way, shape, or form. But if you, Nikki, if you just go online and type in BDSM glossary or polyamory glossary, you will come up with hundreds of websites that will give that to you in a moment. That's not difficult to find, I promise. Really easy to find. BDSM glossary. There's a group on Love Honey, the sex store have a great kink glossary. And I've written one. And I think the problem with it is as well, though, as the same for terms about how we introduce ourselves as sexual interest, whether we're demi, whether we're queer, whatever we are. I think there are something like 200 and something the last time I looked. There are too many for us to be aware of. It's huge. So I think we have to be aware of law and different things. We have to be very aware of how it's impacting us. I think if you're going to work in kink, and if you're going to work in poly, and you're going to work in queer spaces, please get yourself a supervisor who is one of those things, who knows about those things, and who works in it, and who has more experience than you do. It's really important. If you go to a very straight, cis, heteronormative supervisor, they will not understand half of the problems that you bring. And again, it's hard to find qualified supervisors. It's complex. It makes a difference. A lot of people ask, should we be pathologized? We are not. The DSM-5 changed that in 2013. Paraphilic instances are not pathologized anymore. So it's really good. We've changed. And Jerry says they'll have changed even since the most recent one. They will. There are always some being added in, and I get really lost. I think it's really important to get the right sort of training. And I think it's really important if you go to a therapist is to ask, what can you offer me? Are you interested in the person's qualifications? Do they matter? Honestly, in my couples therapy training, the first one I did, not the second one. The second one was accredited. The first one I did was not accredited because it was taught by somebody who had no qualifications, who'd been a therapist for 30 years. I can honestly tell you I learned more in the non-accredited course than I did in the accredited one. He was absolutely superb. He was just one of the best couples therapists I've ever seen. He was incredible. His name was Stephen, and he was just amazing. And it's a real shame for me that it wasn't accredited in any way, but it can't be because he wasn't qualified. I learned more little tips and nuances and how to do things and tools than I learned in the second one, which followed a lot of guidelines. I learned so much more in this one. So I think asking about qualifications is important, making sure the person you're seeing has some form of supervision. You should be able to tell them no. Deborah, you could be my Stephen. Oh, thanks, Beamer. I can honestly promise you I am qualified and insured as well, though. So maybe that makes a bit of a difference. I promise I am. I don't promise that I can show you my credentials. Well, hey, that's some kind of weird thing. Let's not go there. So what is really important to work out is, not intending that. I know, I was kidding. So it's really important to ask the questions you want to ask of any therapist that you see. It's really okay to shop around and speak to a couple of therapists. I don't offer free sessions if you want to shop around. I'm really busy. I'm fully booked. If you want a particular session, then you pay for that. Some of us vary as to how we do that or not. So it's important that you can shop around. However, it's also important to understand the boundaries around that as well. My supervisor gave me a little bit of an interesting challenge the other day with some clients, and they had gone around to everybody trying to get some kind of therapy, and they wanted therapy at half price because of a situation. I definitely have 2 free sessions a week that I give away. I do this workshop for free, and I do Sunday at LAM. I get expenses for that. I give away the equivalent to 5 hours a week. No, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5, 10, 15, 20, 21, 22. I give away about 25 hours a week free of charge. And that's enough for me. So I don't do free sessions from that perspective. I see one kinky, queer or poly person a week for free. And I see a child, especially connected to cheerleading, for free as well. So I see 2 different sets of people every week for free for a session. So we can all decide how we're going to work and what that means and what that looks like. It's really important to understand that you have to hold your boundaries. It's exhausting being a therapist. It's hard work. You have to read a lot. You have to cover a lot. You have to make sure that you do your research, and you have to get your CPD. There's a lot to do, and it ends up costing a fortune. To become a transactional therapist, transactional analysis therapist, part of what you have to do before you take your exams and before you do your live Viva, no, it's not. I'll come back to that in a minute. You have to put down how much learning to be a therapist actually cost you. And when I worked out mine, at the end of the day, it's at least 200 grand so far I've spent on courses, on all the things that I've done, on books, on you name it. Like, it's a shit ton of stuff. If you think the average course costs around, well, it depends actually, 3 to 7 grand. Some of them are a little bit more, depending annually. If you do an MSc and you don't get a grant, that's another 4 years. Or 2 years, depending on how you do it. If you take into account all the therapy you did, at anywhere between 50 to 100 pounds a session. If you take into account supervision that you get, I pay 85 pounds for my supervision. My level 4 diploma costs 4,500 pounds. And does it qualify you to work after that? See, that's the other thing to look at as well. Does this actually give me a qualification to work? And will it mean that I can register myself as a psychotherapist, as a specialist, or as a counsellor? And what do the differences mean? So it really varies. But you've got to remember, Nikki, I've chosen to do a lot more. I've chosen to study trauma, couples therapy, psychosexual, children, families. I've done trauma, like something like that. So I've done quite a lot, each of them being 2 years. And when you start to work all of that out, every book, all the driving you did, everything else as well, and especially as I've been doing this for quite a long time, 50,000, like if I take into account everything, it's around that figure. Yes, and they're all really expensive. Nothing is lawful requirement. You could set yourself as a therapist tomorrow with no experience or qualifications. So in the US and some other countries, you have to be licensed. For example, in the UK, if you become a transactional analyst, you can actually work internationally. It's an internationally recognized qualification. So you can go and work in different places. But most qualifications in the UK are just for the UK, and there is no governing body. Even though we've got the BACP, the UKCP, we've got the National Counselling. I think there are about 20 governing bodies in the UK that are around therapy, but I would argue that the UKCP and the BACP are 2 of the biggest ones of those. They are not actually connected to the government. They are independent governing bodies that have their own standards. APRA, yes, registers psychologists. So psychologist in the UK is a protected term. And to be a psychologist, you have to be... you have to have done a degree that is registered as a proper, so there are, well, what's the word for that? There are, so my daughter's doing a degree at the moment in psychology, but I said to her, make sure it gets one that's registered with the Psychology Society so that she can register herself as a psychologist, because there are lots that don't. A psychology degree at the UK, Jesus, does it cost 20k? And I really like TA, but never realized they do a course just on that. They absolutely do. There are 5 schools in the UK. Is it 5? So you've got Metanoia, you've got the Link, you've got the one in Crowborough, can't remember the name, and you've got a couple of others that are in London as well. Now, so it might be 7 or 8 actually. Schools that do just a transaction analysis postgraduate degree, and it takes you, is it 2 or 4 years? 4 years, I think. And then you have to do 800 hours of practice on top of that. As part of it, you have to do a live Viva panel exam, as well as the written exams as well, chartered psychology. Yeah, BPS, that's the word I was looking for, thank you. Yes, I'm having to study an MA just so I can move to Canada. Otherwise, I'm already qualified in the UK. Exactly. So if you've got an MSc or an MA, both are available. Depends which one you do. ACAP registers the uni psych courses. I thought it was BPS actually, the British Psychological Society. Blimey, that's intense. It's very intense. It's all very intense. So if you want to be a counsellor, you can do a 2-year course that will qualify you, and you need to do maybe 300 hours, and you need to do 80 hours of personal therapy. To be a psychotherapist, there's not like transaction analysis or other things. You have to do a postgraduate course, anywhere between 2 to 4 years, depending on the course. You can do an MSc. Some of them don't qualify you to actually practice. And then you have to do volunteering. So the volunteering has to be with clients. So like, for example, if you do a psychosexual psychotherapy course, you have to do volunteering within the psychosexual psychotherapy aspects, unless you've already got private clients within that, which means you've already been working within that. You have to be approved by your supervisor to do that. It has to be connected to the course. It's like honestly, it's like a feeding system. And if that works, so if you do 2 years psychosexual psychotherapy, I think there are 3 or 4 places in the UK that offer psychosexual psychotherapy that's registered and accredited and recognised. You need a supervisor that's connected to the course, and you have to do, I can't remember how many hours it was, but you have to do X amount of hours free of charge, and you have to pay for the supervision you have around that as well. So all of that is extra costs as you go. And you have to write quite a few papers around it as well. COSRA is good for that. So COSRA is the governing body under the UKCP that does couples and sexual therapy. So under the COSRA website, you can have a look at which ones do them. So there are 2 in London. I did one. I wouldn't recommend that one. I would recommend the other one. If you want to ask me about it personally, feel free. But COSRA, so again, so COSRA is one of the governing bodies under the UKCP. It's another governing body, but they are very much about couples and sexual relationship therapy. So that's who you'd really want to go to. Right, anyone got any questions about being a therapist, about therapy for people like us in any way, shape or form? Anyone got any questions about any of it before we disappear? If not,
Yeah, am I qualified to take over your sessions for the next 2 weeks while you're away?
You're completely qualified if you want to. You're quite welcome to. No, if you, I mean, anyone could do them, couldn't they? Yes, you are qualified. This is part of the problem. This is part of the problem when I go to kink workshops, right? And poly workshops. There isn't a qualification that qualifies you to do a workshop on this. There isn't one. There isn't. So like sometimes when you get people who stand up and well, Poppy will vouch for this even from the other day. You sit down and you watch and you listen to somebody talking and you go, no. Oh, fuck, did you just say that? And it's really interesting, the visceral response that you have. Somebody wrote on FetLife and I wrote back to it, and I'm sure she's had something to say to me. I'll come back to that one in a minute, Jacob. So, and that one, Nikki, I promise. So, she said, workshops can't work to teach you anything. And I said, I think it depends on the person who's running the workshop and what experience they have and what qualifications they have. Of course, I can help people to feel in a workshop. If you could ask in the messages, that would be lovely, please, Rebecca. So, and that's the problem. It depends how you teach. It depends how you do. I mean, that's like saying therapy doesn't work or workshops for therapists doesn't. Of course it works. It depends on your skills. Right, so when's your next workshop? I'm away for 2 weeks because I'm in America. So my next one is the 5th or 6th of May, whenever that is. I can't quite remember, I apologize. And that one is going to be on, I'm just looking up, the 5th of May. I am on the 5th of May. I need my glasses on, I can't read. On the 5th of May, I am covering all things turn on, orgasm, turning on, squirting, and the physiology of orgasm and bodies. And I'm looking at polyamory and cheating, communication, lack of, and what you do. So they're the 2 subjects that I'm covering on the 5th. And on the 12th, I'm starting with closure and lack of communication at the end of a relationship and toxic relationships. What do they look like and what do they mean? Yeah, so they're the subjects that I'm up and coming. And then people ask me, so I never know what's coming. So we'll look at those subjects. There will be a Facebook link every Thursday, not for the next 2 weeks, but every Thursday. And it'll be the same as this, but clearly I now need to change the password, so it won't be exactly the same. And it makes me hesitant, actually. It makes me hesitant to fucking put them out there, you know, like,
Yeah.
Makes me hesitant to put it out there, but however I will always make Jerry or Poppy or somebody, another person who can just, I've never had that before. I'm so sorry that happened. Right, so what are the types of questions do I ask clients as observations do I make when evaluating, monitoring the progress of my sessions? Clients aren't stupid. They pay me a lot of money to come and see me. I don't think I charge that much. Given my experience, I charge 70 or 90 pounds. 70 as a personal therapist for individuals, 90 pounds for couples or polycules. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for improvements. I'm looking for changes. I'm looking for differences in mood. I'm looking differences in capacity as to how people have managed certain situations, whether they've held boundaries, whether they've changed things, whether they've said no or yes to things that are different. So that's what I look for, and that's how it works. And I work with the person on that. And every so often I'll say, how are we doing? What's happening? What's different for you? And we reevaluate, because TA talks a lot about an overarching contract as to what we're all after. And then one of the things I often ask at the beginning of any session, or actually overall sessions, is if we move forward 6 months, how would you know you've got what you wanted, or 6 weeks? And then we work towards that as the overarching contract and the GOGs. That's very TA based. Fifth, yeah, orgasms and also polyamory and cheating, because it happens. Poppy was dying to do the workshop, which you just mentioned. I would have said something in that workshop, believe me, quite horrifically. But everybody knows that about me. What the fuck are you talking about? Would have come out of my mouth. I'd have got chucked out. Thanks. Had therapy a few years ago. It was a difficult experience. It was interesting in light of that. Now, I think it's really important to find the therapist that works for you. All the research proves it's not about their modality. It's not about their experience. It's not about it. It's about the connection that you have. That's what matters. Rebecca says, thanks. My supervisor has said not to advertise that I am kink aware on my website for PP, as it will put clients off. The community is too small. I'm not agreeing, but want a successful practice. Rebecca, it depends where your practice is going to be based on what sort of area you want to work in. I don't even have a website anymore. I don't use a website. I don't have to. Ask Poppy. I send her stuff. I send people stuff. I get requests every week to be seen. I've had 5 this week. I think it depends how you work and what you do. I think you have to be careful as to what accredited body you're with. They have different ideas and principles about this. They have different ideas and principles also about advertising. So like, for example, the UKCP and transactional analysis, when I did have a website, I cannot put up any testimonials. Absolutely not allowed. No testimonials. Whereas different forms of therapy approaches are allowed to have testimonials. So I think it's difficult. Well, I don't know what sort of therapist you are. I don't know what you studied, and I don't know what you want to do. So your supervisor might be right. I think I have a long list of things that I can cover. And one of the things I write under the things that I used to write that I said that I covered was kink and polyamory and different things. But that's no different to me putting addiction, depression, everything else as well. The thing I can't put down in the UK is adoption, because I'm not allowed to technically cover that at all. And I think you have to have some experience of what you're talking about. So I would ask my supervisor why. I would bring it up in conversation. And I would say, what's going on for you that can't be there? What's your experience of that? And honestly, doing something for free will also get you business anyway. So thank you, Cinders. I will ask you as well. Tough night for you. Thank you. Rebecca, is your supervisor kink friendly? Yeah, so I would really have that conversation. What's going on for you around kink? Why would it limit my practice? Could it not be, when you think of the resurgence, not resurgence, but the massive input. Sorry, I've gone 4 minutes over. I'm very aware of the time. When you look at the 50 Shades of Grey impact, I know a lot of you hate it, but when you look at the difference it made to how many people are doing things, and what it means is everybody tried kink. Kink is sold everywhere. When we think 6% of the UK are queer or polyamorous, 4% is polyamorous, 6% are queer, 70 to 80% of people try some form of kink, no matter how mild it is. So actually, is it a terrible thing to put people off, or will it? It's fucking British. We don't talk about sex, we don't talk about money, and we don't talk about quite a few things. There's a really good book by, oh God, what's her name? Katie Fox, called Watching the English. And if you ask what she said about going into asking people things, she couldn't talk about death, she couldn't talk about money, she couldn't talk about sex. They were the most difficult chapters for her to do. If I turn around and said to you, oh, so Caris, what do you earn every year? Karis is very unlikely to want to tell me because we have such a weird thing about it in the UK. We're very strange. We don't share our incomes and we don't talk about death, stiff upper lip and all that. Oh, chap, off we go. And we don't talk about sex. If you ask doctors, apparently the statistics are, I don't know, that if you say you smoke, they double what you say. But if you say you have sex, they halve what you say because we all know that we lie about it. And we say it lasts twice as long as it actually does. So I would just question what that's like for the supervisor, what's going on there. And Rebecca, the question here for you is, what group do you want to work in? What matters to you? Who do you want to be known as? Because that's what fucking matters. You're the therapist. You're the one who wants to do this. Where do you want to go with that? And that's a much more important question. And I would just question some bias around that, potentially, because I think Jerry could be right there. I wonder if it would be worse if a client found out afterwards as that that could feel like you're hiding it. The problem is here, Eunice, is of course we're hiding stuff in therapy. You do not know everything about me as a therapist. I'm quite open and I use myself as an example sometimes, but I've always got in mind, is this for the benefit of the client or is this for the benefit of what's happening? In therapy, you're not supposed to know a lot about me. My personal disclosure is up to me about how much and how I use it and what that means. So we're always going to have secrets from our clients to a certain extent. So I'm not sure if that would be any better or worse. I think it would just be fucking weird if I walked into a dungeon and someone was there. And that's something that really matters. We need a policy with our clients of how do we play in public and what do we do? I personally do not play in public anymore. My cunt is never out, my arse isn't on, my boobs, my tits, nothing is ever out. I don't do any of that because it will change the relationship. If I'm at a private party, I might do. That's a little bit different, but I have a very strong policy about being in public. My eldest daughter is kinky and she's come to LAM with me. And if ever she stays for a party, I walk out the door. I'm not interested. And I've got the same policy with my clients. If a lot of them are around and I'm seeing stuff going on, I just walk away. It's if they want to play, that's up to them, but I tend to walk away and not look, I'm not interested because I don't think it's therapeutically appropriate nor right. I just don't think it's right. Beamer says on my website, I say queer and what I'm aware of, but that's because I want to attract a certain client. And if someone judged me for that, then I wouldn't want to help them. Totally agree with you. Look at who you want to attract as your client and what client base you want to have. I'm no fan of 50 Shades. Don't know what you mean. Does a playful slap on your partner's bum class you as kinky? Well, yeah. Yep, it's out of the vanilla, isn't it? So yeah. And the scary thing in the States is show people do the dangerous stuff, often choking. Oh God, I've got a massive article on that, haven't I? The one on choking. I have a real problem with choking. I mean, be qualified for resuscitation. What's your premise? What are you going to do when something goes wrong? Would you be willing to phone the police straight away and the paramedics and or an ambulance? Like, people really don't know what they're doing when it comes to choking. I have a serious issue. I never stay for the after party anyway. I do in March when the awards and bits are on, but that's it. So yeah, I tend to stay away from those sort of things, which shows I practice what I preach. Choking, someone could die. Yes, waterboarding, someone could die. There are a lot of things that could kill people in kink. There really are. So we have to be very careful about it. So thank you for coming. I'm not back for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, whenever it is. Well, another 2 sessions. I'm back after that. And we're talking about all forms of orgasm, all forms of pleasure. And we're talking about squirting. And we're going to talk about cheating in polyamory and what happens. So I hope everyone's got a bit of today and got something from it in some way, shape or form. If you want a CPD certificate, this is my email address. I'm so sorry about the beginning of this session. I've never had anything like that, but hey, it was interesting. I've learned something. So that's my email if you want. Oh, no, that's not my email. I spelled that completely incorrectly. Got a laugh. Yeah, so I'm sorry because, again, we've never had that before. That was quite shocking. Never had that. And if you've missed anything or you want to catch up, this will also be on YouTube in the morning or the next few days. So thank you very much. And if you've got any questions that you want to ask, have covered in here, drop me an email, drop me a line, let me know. YT, what does YT mean? Oh, YouTube. Oh, it's not mine, it's Lamb's. Hang on, I can do that because it's in front of me right now. Previous workshops, edit, copy. Woohoo! Look at me. I'm so old. I'm surprised I can do this. Edit, paste. I'm 60 in 3 years. That's crazy, isn't it? Right, so those are previous workshops. So thank you very much. We'll be covering those different things. So I will see you all in 3 weeks. Thank you for the good luck and the wishes, because we're going to go cheerleading. Ready? Okay. Wanker wave. See you later. Thank you. Sorry about the hassle at the beginning. Thank you. Bye.